and then if people can't make it today, she'll be able to send out the recording, or if you have to leave early, you'll get the link to the recording and you'll be able to come back and watch it. So I wanted to let you know that'll be happening in the background, the recording. And then also she's gonna keep an eye on the chat today, make sure that, because it's really hard for me to present and look at the chat, but she's gonna make sure that if you have questions, we get those answered. She's also going to be using the chat button, the chat window, to send you some hyperlinks to look at things that I'm going to be talking about on screen. So you will probably want to have your Zoom chat box open so that you can ask your questions in there, as well as get those links and click on them when she sends them to you, okay? Okay, so back to my introduction. My name is LeeAnn Lindsey. I started teaching in 1995. My first assignment was an English as a second language pullout, and I worked with students from kindergarten to 5th grade. Most of my other classroom teaching was actually in 5th grade and up. I did middle school.
But you have to be patient, okay? You guys are gonna overwhelm me. This is a lot.
I'm sorry, was that a question for me? I think it was not. So I have been a technology integrating teacher for about 20 years. I've been training teachers how to use technology in their classroom for about 20 years. And I actually own my own business now called EdVolve. It's like education evolving is sort of where that name comes from. And I still help teachers around Arizona as well as around the United States know how to integrate technology in their classroom. I am also a resident of the Roosevelt boundaries, and I've lived in this area since 2003. So I don't have my own children, but if I did, they would go to Southwest School. So that gives you an idea of where I'm coming to you from today. And Roosevelt, I really care about this community. Like, you know, I've lived here for 17 years. I care about this community. I care about Roosevelt teachers and Roosevelt students. They're my neighbors. And so and I stay in close touch with Roosevelt. So as I learned, you know, about the transition to remote learning, I just called up and I volunteered and said I'd be happy to dig in any way and help. And so that's kind of how I ended up here presenting to you all today. And I'm glad to be here. So my first question for you is going to come in the by way of a poll. So if you give me just a second, the question is, what is your experience using Zoom? And you should have a poll pop up on your screen, and you can click on one answer that best matches your experience. This is your first Zoom, or you've done a few, or you're a aficionado or whatever. And I'm gonna give you about 10 more seconds to answer the poll question, and then I will share the results with you. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll, and now I'm gonna share the results. And it looks like the most popular answer is that folks on this call have used Zoom as both a participant and a host. But we also have folks on here that it's your first Zoom, and lots of folks who it's still new, and some folks who have done it as a participant but never as a host. One of the reasons that I wanted to ask you that was because, you know, this Zoom meeting is new for a lot of people, and it's certainly going to be new to our students. I can almost guarantee that our students have not used Zoom before, and if they have, it certainly has not been for a learning experience. And so when we talk about digital citizenship, we really want to think about how we can set our learning environment up so that students are most likely to be successful. We'll get into a definition of digital citizenship in just a minute, but I want to just I want to throw out a comparison for you. Digital citizenship and online classroom management, if you will, are not the same thing, but they are like really close cousins to each other. And it's in the same way that regular classroom management is not the same thing as character education, but they're really close cousins with each other, because when you develop students' character, you can see it in classroom management. And when you have really strong classroom management, it helps really let students practice their character development. So they're kind of two sides to the same coin, but they're not the same thing. That's kind of like online classroom management and digital citizenship. It's not the same, but they're close. So what we want to do, what we want to remember is to set our Zoom environments up for students to be successful. So 3 of the things that I did is I put you all on mute automatically. Now, if any of you want to unmute yourself because you're trying to ask a question and you can't type it in the Zoom, or you're having problems with the chat, you can certainly, I didn't restrict the ability for you to be able to unmute yourself, but I did start it out that way. And that's going to be one kind of rule of thumb that will help set your conditions up for success with your students. The second thing that I did is I allowed, and this is a setting, I allowed you to use the chat box to type back and forth, and everyone sees everything that we all type. So no matter who you are, if you type something in the chat box, everybody else in the Zoom call sees it. There is a setting, and you have to go in and uncheck it. And by the way, there's a Zoom webinar at 10 o'clock today, right after this one. And they'll teach you how to make polls. They'll teach you about these settings and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to tell you about them, but you'll learn how to do them in that other Zoom webinar. So if you can turn your setting so that, wait, let me tell you what a private chat is. So we just talked about if you type something in the chat, everyone sees it. There is a way that you can type a private message only to one other participant in the Zoom session, and nobody else sees it. It's called a private chat. I wouldn't even see it until after the meeting was over. But you have to go into your settings and turn that private chat off if you don't want that to occur. I would recommend that as a teacher, especially with new students to Zoom, because I wouldn't want students doing their private chatting during my class Zoom meeting. I would only want them to be chatting so that everybody could see it. And then the other thing that I did was I created a waiting room. So if you came to this session early, you couldn't get in yet until I activated you in. And so you were held in what Zoom calls a waiting room. But so that helps because I don't want students in my Zoom unless I'm there. So that's why, the benefit of setting up a waiting room. But then my other recommendation is that you let students into your Zoom a few minutes before class starts. So if your class session is set to start at 9 a.m., I might let them in 5 or 6 or 7 minutes early. I think it's important to remember that, especially during this time of quarantine, we are all kind of lonely. We're missing each other. We're missing them, and they are missing us, and they are missing each other. That's really important. And so when they don't get to see us and they don't get to see each other, then when we go in and we open up the Zoom and start right in on content or start right in on instruction, it can be really hard without them having those few minutes just to see one another, say hello, check in, have a few minutes of social time. So if I were you and I wanted to start class on time, I would say, you're welcome to come 5 minutes early. I'll open up the room and allow you to say hello and chat with your friends for 5 minutes. So I have another resource called 10 Ways to Secure Zoom. We're not going to go over these today, but I got this resource from a Twitter post, and that is going to come to the resources from you. And these are some really good tips. Not that you have to implement all 10 of them, but it will help you, kind of in a really clean fashion, look down the list and see if there's anything that you want to implement with your class. The other thing I want to share, this came, I grabbed this morning. I was on Twitter, and this is a teacher, and he said, I had a virtual meeting with my students earlier, and it went something like this. I'm going to butcher his name, and I don't want to do that. Mr. Arivalo, can my little sister join us? And by the end of our conversation, I had roughly 40 first through 8th grade students engaged in meaningful dialogue, and I was all for it. And I thought this was so beautiful. I think that this shows a real, it shows flexibility, it shows grace and understanding for the situation that we're all in. Siblings are home with siblings. And for any of you who are trying to do remote teaching, and you're also on the parent side of this thing and you're helping your students to do remote learning, or your children to do remote learning, you know that it's not easy to juggle everything. And so I just loved the beauty of being able to invite siblings and things on the phone. I know that you will also have dogs or children in the background. My dog barks during Zoom calls constantly. And I want you to know that all that is okay. It really is okay. This doesn't have to be a perfect science. A Zoom meeting doesn't have to be perfect. So I don't want you to be nervous about that. But I do want to mention just real quickly, while I do think it's great to invite both siblings and parents on Zoom calls, it's really important that parents have an understanding that they're really only supposed to be addressing you as the teacher or their own student. Like if parents want to help their kids get on Zoom, that's great. But we would try and encourage parents not to address other children, because that can get a little chaotic and we've got some issues there. The other thing is we would want to remind parents that they should not be taking screenshots of a Zoom session that has pictures of other people's children, because that's a privacy issue. And so just 2 tips there that, all are welcome, but we just want to establish some boundaries just to ensure that all of our students are, that their privacy is protected. Okay, I'm going to throw out another poll for you. And this poll asks, which word or phrase best describes how you feel about this transition to remote learning? And I've set this poll up to where you can actually choose multiple answers. So if you are both terrified and grateful, you can answer both of those. I'll give you about 15 seconds to find your answers and input them into the poll. And if the poll doesn't work for you, feel free to post in the chat. If one way doesn't work, we've got another way, and it's all okay, and we can be flexible with that. I'll give you about 5 more seconds, and then I'll end the poll and show you the results. Okay, I'm going to end it. And here's what we said. The majority of people, or I don't want to say the majority of people, The most popular answer was open-minded. Let's see what else we have. We have 48% who said they're overwhelmed. I understand that. 31% excited, some obligated, grateful, and cautiously optimistic. 51% said learning new things. A couple haven't decided yet, and a handful of you said, you know, I'm not excited, but I know this is the right thing. And I'll share a really quick story with you. My very best friend in this world, she is a 5th grade teacher in New Hampshire. I've known her for 30 plus years. And in New Hampshire, they're about 2 weeks ahead of us in their transition to remote learning. So about 2 weeks ago, we're on like a group text message strand with all our friends. And my friend, her name's Karen. Karen is freaking out. She is not happy about this remote learning. She was probably in the category, not excited, but I know it's the right thing to do, and emphasis on not excited. So I see what she's saying in the group chat, and I text her back and I say, I'm calling you right now. We're having an emergency session. Pick up your phone. So we get on the phone and I walk her through a couple of things, maybe spend about a half an hour with her. And by the time we get off the phone, I would say that her tone has turned a little bit more towards cautiously optimistic, maybe just a little bit more of that tone. And I will tell you, over the next week, I got a series of text messages. LeeAnn, guess what? I just found this really cool activity for my students to do at home with science experiments. Guess what, LeeAnn? I just set up my Google Classroom. Guess what, LeeAnn? I just set up Seesaw. And then she texted me and said, one of my students did the science experiments and then videoed the science experiment and uploaded it to Seesaw so that I could see the experiment. And it was awesome. And I could see her excitement growing and growing over the week. And I'll tell you that Tuesday morning, I woke up to a text message, because she's 3 hours earlier than me, right? She's on the East Coast. And her text message said, by the time this thing is over, I think I'm going to want to teach remotely all the time. So I tell you that story just to say that if you are the one feeling overwhelmed, feeling terrified, feeling, all those things, I want to tell you, absolutely, those feelings are 100% justified, and know that there is light at the end of that tunnel. You will become more comfortable over the next couple of weeks. This doesn't have to be perfect. We're learning together. And I think that once you get your sea legs with all this, you're actually going to end up enjoying it. So that was sort of the moral to that story. So today I'm going to be talking about digital citizenship, and I am really curious. So I'm going to throw out one more poll. How many of you are familiar with the term digital citizenship? And we'll just give about 10 seconds for this item. Okay, and I'm going to end the poll, and it looks like 65% of us are familiar with the term digital citizenship. So I am going to go over the term for those of you who aren't familiar with it. A very typical definition that most people who have heard of the term know about is this idea of safe, responsible, and ethical technology use. Using technology responsibly is basically sort of the key point there. But I, in this webinar, want to ask you to consider a different way of thinking about digital citizenship, just slightly different. Because the term digital citizenship is actually derived from this idea that as computer users, we are all inhabitants or citizens of the digital world. And as citizens of the digital world, we have both rights and responsibilities to uphold the digital community of which we are all a part. And so a definition that I prefer to think about with digital citizenship is living and learning in an interconnected digital world. Now, the safety aspect, the responsibility aspect, that's all part of living and learning in an interconnected world. So it all rolls together, and it's not much different, but it's a different, it's kind of a different perspective of the same concept. So as we all have been going through this very unprecedented time and rushing to quarantine and get our shelter in place and everything else, one phrase just kept running through my head incessantly. And that phrase is, we are all digital citizens now. And the reason why this phrase kept running through my head is because all of a sudden, now that we're quarantined, we are all living and learning digitally more than we ever have before, right? And to illustrate this, I'll tell you about 2 Sundays ago when we just started kind of this shelter in place, quarantine, stay at home, taking it a lot more seriously. And on that Sunday, I woke up and I had a virtual brunch scheduled with my friends. And so we all actually hopped on a Zoom and turned our videos on, and we ate breakfast together, and we had virtual brunch. And then a couple hours after that, I had virtual book club, and all my book club ladies hopped on a Zoom call, and we talked about the book. And then a couple hours after that, I had a virtual happy hour, and a bunch of my other friends hopped on, and we just socialized and had happy hour over Zoom. And so my question for you, and I'd love for you to put your answers in the chat, is I just told you about 3 ways that I am living and learning in digital spaces that I never have before. And I'm interested what examples you have for ways in which you are living and learning in digital spaces that you've never done before. And you feel free to go ahead and type your example in the chat. Bible study in church. Yeah. Okay, learning, developing lessons and games. You celebrated Passover, probably maybe on Zoom or on another one. Okay, socializing with family. Movies and photos. A gender reveal on live video. That's a great one. These are such good examples. When I did this webinar on Tuesday, someone mentioned that they actually participated in a wedding. Someone got married over Zoom, and I thought that was a really interesting one too. Probably not the couple's first choice in how they were going to do that, but also probably a lot more people got to come and participate. Happy hour friends, dancing with friends, adopted a child. Oh, congratulations. So we're living and learning in spaces like digital spaces like never before, and so are our students. And I think that's really important to remember, that it's new to us, it's even newer to them. So I'm going to back up and I'm going to qualify that statement a little bit. Our students are very experienced and knowledgeable about how to use technology. They, as you know, they can grab a phone or grab a device and they can swipe and tap and do all those things. That's not the newness to them. But what is new to them is being in these formalized settings, is learning with technology, is being in digital community with others in a more structured manner. These are all things that are new to our kids. And so we want to make sure that we set them up for success. So the next question I want you to think about is, what are the skills that digital citizens need to successfully learn and live in the digital world? And so what I'm going to do is, in a minute here, Melissa's going to put this URL to a website in the chat, and I want you to go there. So again, the question is, I'm going to show you a list of 17 digital age skills, digital citizenship skills. And I'm going to ask you to find 3 of them that you think are most important for our kids right now. So when you go to this link, here's what you're gonna see. You're gonna see a framework, and it's gonna have 3 gears on it. And I'm taking you to this page just so you see that this framework, digital citizenship, is actually just one part of the framework for learning in the digital age. But then when you get here, I'm gonna have you click on the plus sign on the digital citizenship gear. And when you get there, you will see a framework for digital citizenship that starts off with safety, and it levels up to legality, responsibility, ethics and values, and then personal best and social good. And then it has 17 indicators below that with digital citizenship skills. And I'm gonna ask you to pick 3 of them that you think are the most important for our students right now. And then I'm gonna ask, and then I'm gonna throw out another poll if I can find my polling button. It keeps moving on me. There it is. Okay, and then you can use the poll to indicate which 3 you think are most important on that list. Now, you'll see on the poll that there are 10 indicators in question number 1 and 7 indicators in question number 2. And the only reason it's like that is because Zoom only allows me to put 10 choices in a question, and so I had to break it up into 2. But you can click on 3 no matter which, if they're in question 1 or question 2. Just pick on the top 3 that you feel are most important. And I'm gonna actually give you a couple of minutes to really look over this list and think about it. So I'm gonna set my timer for 2 minutes. Okay, and again, the question is, which 3 of these are most important for our kids to learn and practice right now? You have about another 45 seconds. It says some people can't submit. And then someone said it took 4 answers before I could submit. So if you need to select 4 of the most important skills, you just go right ahead and do that, because we're being flexible as the technology requires us to be. Aha, probably you need 1. So if your 3 answers were only under question 1, you might need to select one from the question 2 poll as well, and that might help. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. I know that some people weren't feeling 100% successful, so we can talk about that. But from the ones who were able to answer, it looked like the most popular answer was engaging in safe online relationships. Also, protecting privacy and identity came up pretty high, as did being mindful of the viral nature and permanence of online content. Recognizing technology's role in physical, social, and emotional well-being, engaging in healthy relationships, cultivating human and online and real-life spaces, and then using digital content and tools to satisfy intellectual curiosities. These are great answers. They're all really important right now and really relevant. For the folks who had some problems submitting, what I think was probably the problem was that I had to divide the poll into 2 questions because it only let me put 10 selections for question number 1. So 10 were in question number 1 and 7 were in question number 2, but it was really one big question. So perhaps if you only chose answers from question 1, it didn't let you submit if you didn't select something from question 2. It wanted you to answer both questions. So I think that's probably why that happened. Thanks for letting me know. Again, you work through all the technical difficulties with grace, and you can always post, if that happens, just post your answers in the chat so that you can be heard. Okay, so I have for you 3 tips today to get started with digital citizenship in your classroom with your students. And we're gonna unpack each one of these. So just to let you know up front, the 3 tips are to introduce the vocabulary of digital citizenship. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Number 2, to have students create digital norms and expectations with you. And you'll notice that with is in all capital letters. That's the most important word in the whole sentence. And then number 3 is to ask them to reflect on their, I need to share my screen. Thank you. And ask them to reflect on their digital behaviors. Okay, so tip number 1, introducing the vocabulary of digital citizenship. I would guess that most of our students are unfamiliar with the term digital citizenship. And when we give them the language to use, when we introduce them to the vocabulary term digital citizenship, as well as digital citizen, what we do is we give them a language so that enables them to think about and talk about their digital behaviors and their digital decision making. Without that terminology, it's very vague for them. So giving them those terms, letting them know what they mean, really gives them a way to think and talk about their own digital decisions. What I have for you today is a set of 6 digital citizenship posters to help introduce the terminology to your students. So this isn't a really good picture, but I can read the posters to you. One says, digital citizenship, the rights and responsibilities of digital participation. Thoughtful and engaged participation in the digital world. I am a digital citizen. I use technology for good. I am a digital citizen. I make healthy and positive digital decisions. Digital citizens take ownership of co-creating and upholding shared values within digital communities. Digital citizens interact with technology thoughtfully and conscientiously. You'll get a link to a blog post that I wrote that's called We Are All Digital Citizens Now. And at the bottom of the blog post, there's a button that you click and it takes you right to a PDF that you can download all 6 of these posters. And I'm hoping that you'll use these posters as you begin working with your students in these digital spaces. So the conversation can sound like, have you ever heard the term digital citizenship? What do you think it means? What do you think the word citizenship means? Maybe citizenship is a word that they've already heard of. And we can start talking about what it means then to be a citizen in the digital world. And we can help them understand that now that we're all in this digital learning space, we are all digital citizens together in the same learning community, in the same digital learning community. And so then we can ask them, what do we want this digital learning community to be like? And when they answer us, we can help them figure out then what it will take, what rules we can create, what norms we can create to create the kind of digital learning environment that we all want to have. And I think that's what introducing the language of digital citizenship can lead us to. It's not just giving them another vocabulary word to know, but it's really a conversation starter so we can have that dialogue with our students. And so you will get the link to be able to access and download these posters. And I hope you use them. Tip number 2 really just piggybacks right onto tip number 1, and that was have the students create digital norms with you. So I'm curious, and please feel free to type in the chat for this one. How many of you at the beginning of the school year have your students create your classroom rules with you? How many of you do that? And then my question is, if you do, if you have the kids kind of participate in creating the rules, why do you do that? Yep, I'm seeing lots of people that do buy-in. Buy-in, it gives them ownership. Everyone is included ownership. It holds them accountable. These are all great reasons. So I think the 2 reasons that stand out for me, buy-in and ownership, to me is the same thing. I believe in these rules. I've helped create them. I have ownership over them. And the other one is this idea of accountability. It's kind of like, I know what they are. Everyone is clear on the rules when they've helped create them. And I think that's the same sort of mindset in terms of having them create digital norms with you. Again, kind of going back to that idea that teachers have never taught in this type of digital environment, probably in this Zoom environment, and our students have never been learners there. And so because this is a new territory for all of us, we have to create those norms together. And so just like you do spend time at the beginning of the year to do that, I would do that kind of right in the beginning to lay that foundation, help to set those expectations up for success. And so the progression of the conversation might sound like, again, what do you want this digital learning space to look and feel like? What's the acceptable behavior that's going to help us get there? And then how will we hold ourselves and each other accountable? And there's some resources that I'll share with you. The first one is a 2nd grade example. So these digital norms were created by a class of 2nd graders with the help of their teacher. Granted, it wasn't during a remote learning. This was done prior to remote learning. And you can see how comprehensive this is. This was at Shorecrest Preparatory School. This is in Florida. And their mascot is the Chargers. And so they were able to be really creative and create their norms in an acrostic poem. And I'm not suggesting that you need to do that, but I share this with you for a couple of reasons. Number 1 is because I want you to see that even 2nd graders are able to do this with the guidance of their teacher. And the second reason I'm sharing this example with you is because this is so new, you as the teacher might not be as clear on what all the rules are that should be included in your digital norm agreement. And so this can kind of help you to become more familiar with what other classes and what other schools are doing for their digital norms. And that'll help give you some ideas to help you guide your students in this type of an exercise. The other resource I want to share with you is a discussion sequence . And again, this is basically what I've been talking about already, and so I'm not going to go into it fully, but it just kind of gives you these questions in a sequence to ask. Have you ever used technology before in the classroom? What was that like? How did it go? What are some ways we can use the digital community? What do we want it to look like? I think what's really important that I didn't emphasize before is this right here, and that is, once you agree on what the norms are, having students also participate in the question, how do we hold ourselves and each other accountable for these digital norms? I think that as teachers, what you want to try and do is create an environment where students are holding each other accountable, themselves accountable. And what you don't necessarily want is every time a student has a digital infraction for the other students to be letting you know. And then that turns into like a tattling kind of thing all the time. Now, obviously, if there are some serious infractions, you're going to want to know about those. But for a lot of the minor infractions, I think if we can really help kids understand how to hold themselves accountable and then how to help each other stay on track as well, it'll really help us run smoother, more uninterrupted digital instructional times. And then right along with that question is, what will you do? And this is not you as the teacher. It's not me asking you, teacher, what will you do? It's you asking the students. When you see one of your peers breaking a digital agreement that we've all agreed on, what are you going to do? Because when they have that answer, when we've all discussed it, now when it happens, they actually know what to do. Maybe it's that they're going to, you know, virtually tap their friend on the shoulder and say, hey, you know, we agreed to this and you're not doing this. They'll obviously say it in much kid-friendlier language, but they're going to remind one another. One thing that came up in the last session on Tuesday is, you know, some of the strategies that we use for classroom management, they can be a little trickier in a digital environment. Or maybe it's not trickier, it's just we can't use the same exact strategies. So we have to think about them a little differently. So in our real life classrooms, I know that one strategy probably we all use is the strategy of proximity, right? When a student is off task or doing something they're not supposed to be doing, we can walk real close to them and stand there, and they know that we know that they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it helps them, just our mere presence right there helps them get back on track. Proximity is one of those strategies that is harder and not as possible in a virtual space. But when we think about those types of strategies, what are some of the other things that you feel like you could do or you could set up for your class in a virtual space that would also work as reminders and support? You guys are all super experienced teachers, so I just want to throw this out. Like, what are some strategies you can think of to help your students stay on track that are easy, that won't interrupt your instruction? Okay, so we can use some of the technology settings. We can use other tools like Class Dojo. We can say their names. Review rules prior to starting instruction. I really like that because that's proactive, right? Like, instead of waiting for that infraction to happen, kind of reminding them up front that remember that these are our rules and this is how we're going to conduct ourselves. So a little bit more proactive. Someone in the last working in smaller groups is great. You guys have some great answers. You're all experienced teachers. One of the other things I'll share with you from the last session that someone mentioned is maybe once you get rolling, setting some of your students up to be digital leaders. And so it might not always be you reminding people and reminding your students to get back on track, but maybe other students can act in this role of a digital leader and help their peers stay on track. private chat with students is a good one too. Private chat is a really good one for me, technically speaking, because I can't walk and chew gum at the same time. It's really hard for me to instruct and do a private chat with my student. So that's a really great suggestion. For me, it's just technically tricky. So, okay, I'm gonna go back here to our presentation, and I'm gonna share one more resource with you that you will all have the link to. Co-teaching. Co-teaching is a great, wonderful example. Just like Melissa is monitoring the chat for me, if you're co-teaching, you've got two of you to kind of manage that. I think that's wonderful. So this is the last resource I'm going to share with you on this particular note, which is a Google slide deck template for your classroom tech agreement. Once you've had this conversation with your students, once you've agreed on your digital norms, this is just a slide deck that you can put it in to kind of finalize it. You have editing privileges to this. So we agreed to.
I actually put this in Keynote after our class on Tuesday. So now it's all ready to go to be edited in Keynote.
That's perfect. So you have it in Keynote. So it's just a we agree to. These are our rules. We agree to hold ourselves and each other accountable by. And then when we break a technology agreement, we may need to, and so you can talk about what that might look like if students are repeatedly, if you need to use consequences for that. And so that resource is available for you in Keynote. Thank you so much, Melissa. I'm going to pause here and I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions before I move on. To Melanie, who said that you're going to need to review the rules prior to each lesson and you have kinders, totally yes. And I wonder if parents will be willing to hop on and do a first Zoom or a second Zoom with their little ones. I know not all of our parents are home and not able to do that, but you're right, with the kinders, they're going to need lots of reminders, and they probably don't have as much experience kind of navigating technology in general. And so if we can invite our parents on, I think that could also be helpful. And then when you review the rules with your kinders, you're also reviewing the rules with the parents, which can be super supportive. Okay. I had a tip number 2 continued because I really, after I put together my 3 tips and I thought of another one and I didn't want to add 4 because I like 3 better. So I did like a tip 2 continued, but we already kind of talked about this. So I'm just going to like rush through it. That is just remembering this idea that this is ongoing. Like this is not a one and done kind of thing, digital citizenship. We're just going to teach a lesson on digital citizenship. We're going to create some norms and then never address it again. This is really ongoing. It takes time. It takes modeling. Students are going to make, they're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. And I would just encourage you to be patient with them, because this is all a new learning space for everybody. So what's really important is the message that we model to our students right from the get-go, and that is the message that all students are welcome and respected here. And I put in parentheses, say this many times and in many different ways. And the more times that we can say that message to our students that everyone is welcome here, they will begin to feel more and more like a community. And the more they begin to feel like a community, even in this digital space, the less likely they are to want to disrupt that community. So I would just say, really, everything that you know about building community in your classroom, really take that online. All are welcome here. I've already gone through all of these suggestions that I have in the bullets. I'm going to give you one more resource, and that's a Think Before You Post poster. And someone asked earlier if there were posters that were a little bit more elementary language. This one might be a little bit more elementary language appropriate. Before you post, think, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? And is it kind? This is a really good litmus test that we can share with our students, to post, to chat, to kind of participate in any way in the digital world. So you're welcome to have this as well. And that link will be shared with you. Oops, wait, what am I doing here? I'm not sharing, I'm presenting. And finally, the last tip is to ask students to reflect on their digital behaviors. There's a body of research that tells us that the more mindful and aware we are of our actions, the more likely we are to engage in ethical decision making. So in other words, let me say that in one more way. Increased awareness of our actions promotes more ethical decision making. So let's think about that with digital citizenship. We want students to become more aware, more mindful of their digital behaviors and their digital decisions. So the question that we would then want to ask is, how do we help students become more aware of their digital actions? And the best way that I know how is to talk about it, is simply to talk about it and to give them really good things to think about and to talk about with others. So I don't know if any of you remember this. I brought this up in the last webinar and nobody remembered it, but there was a series of PSAs about 5 or 6 years ago, and they were about drinking, underage drinking. And these commercials would show parents super awkwardly having conversations with their, I don't know, middle school, early high school kids about drinking. And the parents were always super nervous and awkward and stumbling over their words. And the moral behind this PSA campaign was, you don't have to get the conversation right, just start the conversation. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect, and don't wait for the perfect words and don't wait for the perfect time. Just